Just a little bit more on my background. I was a social worker before I came into IT for about a decade. So I was working with people with a variety of challenges. And then I went back to school to become a developer. I wasn't very good at coding, but I saw this Scrum Master role and I thought, ooh, I can do that. A lot of the skills that I had from social work applied to Scrum Master work. Conflict resolution, transparency, communication, collaboration, solving problems. So this talk has kind of developed over a long period of time, but it's sort of a blend of that human-centered approach, individuals and interactions, and agility and agile, and where are we with those things. So I've sort of been playing around with this concept around the value of resilience. We value being resilient, and agility is maybe currently not as à la mode as it used to be. I'm also French and used to teach a lot of classes in France. And I'm currently in France for 4 months, so that's why I get to come to some European conferences, which have been absolutely fabulous. So has anyone heard this rumor that Agile is dead? Anyone heard this? No, kind of. It's not true. It's fake news. Don't believe it. There's no such thing. Oh, wait a second, though. If you Google it, it's quite interesting. You get a lot of Agile is dead out there. Okay, maybe there is some truth to it. If you look and you talk to people, and I've talked to people at this conference, I've heard of people saying, well, we're not Scrum Masters anymore, we're enablement managers. Or, yeah, we don't have Agile coaches anymore, we have, something else that's been replaced by that. Or we've seen companies lay off or get rid of those roles, or no longer have a demand for Agile consulting companies to come in and coach teams and organizations to implement this way of working. Or maybe it's because we know how to do it already, so we don't need any help. So there's a few things that I'd like to explore around why this may or may not be truth or fake news around Agile is dead. So I want to start off with a little bit of that and then look at sort of this focusing or using the lens of resiliency as a way of explaining or looking at the value of agility. So what I've seen in my experience, and although Tomac and I met in about 2012, I was first introduced to these concepts in 2002. So when I changed careers from being a social worker for 10 years to becoming a developer, I had an internship at an oil and gas company in Calgary, Alberta, and they had hired ThoughtWorks and Ken Schwaber to help them learn how to do Scrum. So by accident, I was part of a Scrum team on my first experience as a developer on a real team, on a real project. And at the time, it was brand new and it was crazy. So the people who were doing anything, and in the earlier talk, the keynote, they were talking about extreme programming. Extreme programming was the number one sort of approach to doing this. Scrum was also sort of there at the same time, and now obviously Scrum is a lot more popular. But there was this demand that started to build around, what is this Agile thing? What is Scrum? And should we do it and should we not? And then it got quite popular. And then we saw some dips. I saw a dip around the financial crisis in the US in 2008, where there was some restrictions. And so I've sort of seen this flow of demand for and wanting help, or, we heard about Agile transformations or change management and those kinds of things. And I think right now, there's maybe a little bit of a dip, or maybe there's a bit of a plateau of this is kind of the new normal. So let's explore some of those reasons. One of the reasons I think is because it's become this checkbox, or it's been the primary conversation. So I hear a lot of, are we doing the practices? Are we agile? As the barometer of value. In other words, yes, we're being successful. And I argue that agility should be, or practices should be, secondary to the why agile. Why are you doing this? And I think some of the mistakes that are being made by organizations or teams are being overly focused on the practices in the checkbox, and you can do a daily scrum, and I'm sure you've all seen them, and they're very authoritarian. What did you do yesterday? How come you didn't get this done? What's your turn? What did you do yesterday? That's not the purpose of the daily scrum, but we can check it off and say, we did it. Isn't it great? Or having a retrospective where you don't have a lot of transparency or openness, right? So let's talk about what went, what we could do better. Everything's great. Yeah, it's all good. Or it's radio silence. And as we heard in the talk, silence is a piling up of risks, right? If everything's great, something's not great. So maybe that's part of the challenge around the depopularity that I've seen. And I saw this trend before. I worked in a consulting company where we'd go in and they'd say, use the practices, but just don't use the words. Don't say Scrum. Anyone had that experience? Yeah, don't say Scrum, don't say Agile, but do the things, but shh. We call that commando Scrum, right? Just go in quietly. Don't put up too many colored Post-its. I worked in France, and I was introducing. So agility came a little bit later to cultures that were maybe a little bit more hierarchical. So I'll say that France is a little bit more hierarchical in the working environment. And I remember coming in and saying, okay, great, we're going to do these practices. And I came in with all these colored Post-its. And one of the comments from the leadership was, are we in kindergarten? Right, this idea of, this isn't okay. So checklist approaches. Anybody had any issues with leadership and agility? Raise your hands. No problems ever, Tomac? No, they're all on board. They all support you. They all invest in these changes. They think it's a good idea. They send you to conferences like this. They give you the time off. An interesting way of looking at it is a lot of leaderships will say, yes, we're agile. We need to be agile. And then you ask the team members how agile their leaders are, and they don't have the same perspective. I teach, certified Scrum Master and Product Owner classes, and one of the consistent things I hear from my participants is, my leaders need to be in this training class because they don't know what you've just told me. Can you come and tell them what you just told me? So there's a disconnect or a discourse between, what we see our leaders doing and then what is actually maybe happening on the teams. And I've had some conversations in this conference where there is that disconnect between, it's harder to move those people along. So that's another one of the sort of drivers, I think, around this, Agile's not okay, or it's not cool, or it's not good, or maybe it's hard. And as Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland said, and they took it out of the last iteration of the Scrum Guide, but it used to say in the previous one, before they made the last edit to shorten it, so they deleted a bunch of things, is one of the things they deleted that I really liked is Scrum is simple to understand, but difficult to master. So just because it's easy and only 14 pages long doesn't mean that it's not really hard to do. So doing the checkboxes sounds easy, but it's quite challenging. Another thing that I've seen in my 20 plus years of working in this way is when I first started, the Scrum Master course was barely a thing. I took my certified Scrum Master class in 2004. And I don't even think there was a product owner class yet. And in 2025, they're like mushrooms. There's a new one all the time popping up. Someone's coming up with a new class or certification. Maybe that's confusing for some of our customers. Maybe they don't know what flavor they're supposed to use. And if you think about any of Alistair Coburn's work, one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto, he talks a lot about shuhari, right? Sort of the shu level being the beginner level and the novice, and they want one way to do things, right? Tell me how I be agile, and they want that one recipe. And maybe it's confusing when you say, well, here's a whole cookbook of recipes to get started. So I think that might be an interesting thing to consider as well. Just the origins of this. Did you know that Agile's been dead for 10 years? I was actually surprised to learn about this. I was like, well, who started this whole rumor, this fake news? So you can thank Dave Thomas, and I don't know about how they're going to share the slides, obviously take a picture, but go and have a listen to his talk from 10 years ago where he was talking about Agile is dead. So if we're all here at an Agile conference, it can't possibly be dead, because we're still here talking about it. And I've been doing it for a long time, and I've learned a bunch of things from you and in our conversations and presentations that I've seen. So, but part of the dead Agile part is forgetting that it's a verb, right? It's not checking off boxes in the practices necessarily. It's the being Agile. So you can't do Agile. Being Agile is the key. So, Agile's not dead, right? Sure, demand is down, but I think that's temporary. I think there's still problems to solve. So it's being done wrong. Has anyone gone in as a Scrum Master or coach and they're like, yeah, we're doing Scrum, we're Agile, and you look around and you see something different? Yeah, right? They self-identify as, yep, we're doing it right. And you're just shaking your head. So that's an opportunity, right? People still need your help. They still need that guidance. They still need to learn from each other. So I still think that opportunity is very much there. I think that this sort of flooded market idea, right? Everyone's doing it. Everyone's got a certification. Everyone has a flavor. I actually think that's natural innovation. I wasn't supposed to use that word. Sorry, Simon. Experimentation. So the idea that we're trying it in different ways. Even Alistair, I see Agile, or scaling models. Scaling models didn't exist when I started. The only thing we had for scaling models was called the Scrum of Scrums. Just have teams do a Scrum. That was it. And now there's, I don't know, at least a half a dozen, if not a dozen, different scaling models. So I think that's just a natural evolution, and some of those will get pruned off, and then I think that's a good practice. And we've been doing it for a long time, right? So of course more people know about it. We don't need as much help, right? This is not a new and novel concept like it was when I first started, where it was only the early adopters on that curve that were really trying to do this thing. So I still recommend it. I don't think Agile is dead. I use it at home, actually. I have a backlog. I have Post-it notes. I have somewhat regular sprint reviews where I pull the thing out of the closet, or I open my closet doors and I look at all the Post-its, and I'm asking myself and my team members who's going to do this task and who's going to do that one. So I think it's still very relevant to all kinds of work that we do. A friend of mine, who works alongside with me, used it to organize her wedding, right? So these are common sense practices. I still think it's a good way. And I haven't figured out a better way yet, nor have I heard of a better approach. Right, as far as variations of it. So yeah, sure, the TPS Toyota production systems, yes, the grandfather to Agile. Kanban, great. It's a variation on a theme, but the theme itself, or the Agile principles, I don't see something that's different than that I would recommend more than considering that approach in a world where you can't predict the future. Now, if you have a predictable system, a predictable future, you know exactly what is needed, you know exactly how to build it with the same people, then you don't need to iterate and you don't need to have that agility, right? If you don't need to change on a dime for a dime, then obviously this doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense in every single situation. So I want to kind of now bring in the idea of resilience and agility, and maybe we can look at that from a different perspective. So let's just look at the definition of these two words. One is change on a dime for a dime, being able to pivot quickly. And the other one is about being able to recover from not being able to predict the future. So my ability to recover from something that I couldn't plan for, that I didn't know was going to happen, or I didn't know exactly how it was going to happen. So I think of a cheetah being an animal that's agile. Now there are animals in the savannah that are not agile, and they're able to survive. I would say a tortoise is not agile. I would say an elephant is not agile. So not every project needs to be agile. Not every animal is valuable or can survive only if it's agile. Only if you need to be. So the reason that the cheetah needs to be agile is because what it's eats is not very predictable. Whereas maybe a tortoise in the grass, I'll get there in 20 feet. It's still there tomorrow, so I don't need to change on a dime for a dime or to pivot because I know what's going to happen or I have my size to protect me. These concepts are what I'm sort of playing around with, and the fail-friendly culture, or the reason that we iterate in Scrum or Agile, the reason that we iterate is because we can't predict the future. And in organizations whose culture, and most of the organizations that I worked with, were waterfall, traditional, right? So they're plan-driven, so they like predictability. So you can't become resilient without some challenges. And so I want to look at a couple of examples of that, since it's Agile by Example. This one's not mine, but I think this is really interesting. So 1987, Arizona, scientists are trying to maybe figure out how we can live on other planets, creating a biosphere where 8 humans could survive forever with oxygen, water, food, all within this dome. And one of the interesting things that they discovered is that the trees grew faster in the biosphere, but they would fall over because there was no wind, there was no stress on the trees. So the trees did not build up resiliency because they were brought up in a bubble. And so you need stress. In other words, the wind pushes the trees around, which forces them to build bigger roots and thicker bark, which then makes them less likely to topple over when there's a wind. So the value of stress creates resiliency. And that's what I think is an interesting thing to kind of look at when we have organizations that are resistant to unpredictable, right? One of the questions I ask is, do we value, we welcome changing requirements even late in the development cycle. And then I'll say, great, how does your team react when there's a change request? Is it, yay, what's the new idea? Or is it, oh, what do you mean there's a change request? That means that we're not going to deliver on time, right? So if you're on the secondary one, then maybe we don't really value that change. And just think for yourselves of something that's been a challenge for you in your teams or as a team member or in your organization that made you feel, once you got on the other side of it, that you felt stronger, you felt more resilient. Right? And I'm sure we can all think of those things, even physical, right? If you go to the gym and lift 20 pounds and then you try lifting 30 pounds, that stresses your body, but you become stronger because of it. So I want to look at a few more of those examples. And I looked a little bit, did some research around what do other people think about what are the elements that create resilient teams. So I like this Harvard Business Review about the 4 things that create resilient teams, and I thought of the 5 Scrum values, and I thought, well, there's a pretty close relationship between those 2 things, between those 2 lists. So candor, the ability to have open dialogue. Well, we have openness in the Scrum values. Resourcefulness, right? When faced with challenges, the team can pull together. Focus. Courage, commitment comes to mind. Compassion, right? That you can share in each other's successes and failures. The respect for our team members. And the humility that you can ask for help, right? The courage and the trust that we build in our teams. So the Scrum framework and the Scrum values, I think, are enablers to creating resilient teams. Anyone familiar with this cartoon? I'm dating myself. Yes, yeah, so we're starting to lose some of the lore from the people before us. So Ken Schwaber used to talk about this in his Scrum Master classes, and Mike, then they created a cartoon based on that conversation. So the idea of the chicken and the pigs, only the pigs can talk during the daily Scrum because only the pigs can talk during the daily Scrum because they're committed, but the chickens are just involved. So we used to say that, if you're not part of the team, you don't get to talk during the daily Scrum because that's the pigs that get to talk, and the chickens can come and listen, but they can't interrupt. So here's an example of trying to build resilience within an organization through Scrum mastering and coaching. So I'll paint the picture. I'm the Agile coach, there's a Scrum master, and there's a chicken who keeps interrupting and directing the developers. Why are you doing that? You should be doing this instead. And so, I tell the Scrum master, you should tell that person that they shouldn't be interrupting. And I had the cartoon poster on the wall, and I had the rules on the wall. So we did all the nice little baby steps. And so he was very worried about doing that because that was his boss's boss's boss. Thou shalt not tell the boss's boss's boss that they can't talk during a meeting. But if we look at the Scrum framework, that event is for developers by developers. So I said, well, when you're there, then tell him he can't talk. And that didn't go over very well. He got his hand slapped, and I had to come in and have some conversations with the leader about what happens when you aren't open to feedback and you lose transparency. Because if you tell that person, hey, I can talk when I want to, the next time the Scrum Master sees an impediment that involves a leader, they're not going to bring it up because they got their hand slapped. And as some people have told me that I've coached, that's a career-limiting move, Petra. Are you kidding me? There's no way I'm going to do that. So building a resilient organization requires openness, right? Candor. And you can't have candor if you're not allowed to speak up to people in your organization. So we worked it out. We had conversations, facilitations, and the leader changed their behavior, which then made the organization more resilient, so that we could then have more candor in our teams. So, can we avoid challenges, and should we? We'd like to, but if we spend too much time avoiding challenges, then we're back to waterfall, and they always get it wrong anyway, most of the time, right? They still get it wrong, even though invest. If we look at some of the work done around education, so apparently this is the most popular TED Talk ever. And one of the things he says is if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. So part of resiliency, which is embedded in agility, is that we are prepared to be wrong. That's why we iterate. That's why we do continuous planning. That's why we demonstrate. That's why we show it to our customers, because we're prepared to be wrong, as opposed to building for 12 months, delivering, crossing our fingers, and hoping that we've done it right. So some of those elements that we saw from Harvard Business Review, right? Let's just look at that humility, accept, being able to ask for help in our teams. This is a really challenging thing. So I talk about transparency, one of the 3 pillars. I call it painful clarity, because if the degree of transparency is too comfortable, it's probably not transparent enough. So it needs to be a little bit uncomfortable so that we can get that openness. So I want to show you a few examples. This is an organizational impediments backlog. So I took this picture. We have a few Scrum Masters in the picture, and we also have a few leaders. So one of the ways to have openness between the teams and the organization is every time that the team does a retrospective and they identify some things that they can't fix themselves, they put it on this organizational impediments backlog, and once a week, all the Scrum Masters, there was 5 teams, get together. It's in an open space, and the leaders come up, and the leaders are now the pigs, right? They're the ones that are the team members. And we are the stakeholders as Scrum Masters, and we say, here's our backlog of impediments. Leaders, what are you going to do to help us get faster, be more efficient? Which impediments? So what are you working on? What's getting in your way of getting it done? And what did you get done? And what are you working on next? So I recommend organizational impediments backlog as a way of being ready to be wrong, right? Preparing that. You may have heard of Henrik Nyberg's example in his Spotify video. Being technically prepared to be wrong, right? Obviously, automated test cases. The reason you do that is because you might make a mistake. So you need to reduce the blast radius technically as well, so that things can break. It's okay if they break, but you can quickly recover from that so that it's not something that's going to put your business at a big risk. Small number of people for a small amount of time in a small area. So technical ways that you can prepare to be wrong. Other ways to increase that openness is things I've done around what are quotes people saying in the hallway or around the team anonymously. What is your wonder wall? I wonder if so-and-so knows about this. Or questions that people have. So these are sort of Scrum Master or Agile coaching things that I've done to make learning safe, right? We want people to learn. We want to be able to recover from those failures. When we look at leadership, right? So good leadership comes from creating a resilient organization. And a resilient organization is one that can sense and respond on a continuous basis. We were just talking about sort of that portfolio stuff in the keynote. That it's not just once a year planning or 5-year plans, but it's continuous sensing and responding so that you can do more of what's working and do less of. So instead of planning a project and going from all the way to the end, you're constantly saying, should we keep investing in that one? Should we stop? Should we reorient it at the sort of portfolio level? So I want to show you an example of an organizational investment in an experiment. Now, I was going to call it innovation, but I can't use that word anymore because it's experimentation. So I know Simon will talk about that in his close-up keynote. So I worked at ThoughtWorks, and they invented something called ThoughtWorks University. The goal was, how can we create amazing consultants and grow leaders from within instead of having to hire them? So new hires at the Agile Consulting Company would be sent to India for 5 weeks for an intensive training, and that training was mostly cultural, to be honest, around agile ways of working, serving and delivering for customers, and building. It's challenging. It's stressful to go to India for 5 weeks to work with people that you haven't worked with to solve problems, direct customers. I can tell you it was challenging to go to Bangalore. But that stress made me way more resilient when I was then sent off to go help a client in Utah or wherever it might be. So that's an example, and it's still going on today. Somebody was just posting on LinkedIn recently about the 20-year anniversary of ThoughtWorks University. So leadership, double down on what's working, walk away from what's not. A couple more examples. One of the leaders of a platform, she put a suggestion box. She said, well, if my teams have to be transparent and open, I'm going to be transparent and open. So she put a suggestion box, and once a week, she would stand up and blindly, that's very brave, has a lot of courage, would read out the suggestions, the anonymous suggestions from people in her organization. Right, so living by those values and applying it to herself as a leader. I thought that was amazing. Another example is we wanted co-located spaces. Now this is in the, where we didn't have to worry so much about distributed and pre-COVID. But the team wanted a co-located space. So we said, can we please have a co-located space? They said, well, it's going to take like 3 to 6 months and cost $30,000. So that same leader that had the suggestion box, we whispered to her and we said, if the space is different tomorrow, she's like, I didn't hear anything. And we as the consultants came in with Allen key wrenches and we changed the space. And the next morning, it's not exactly what it looked like, but you get the idea. So asking for forgiveness instead of permission. That's stressful. It's stressful to her, stressful to us. Are we going to get in trouble? But we get the result, and it may or may not work, right? They may force us to get it back, but it actually stayed. A couple more on the business. I worked at Gap e-commerce in San Francisco, and they tried to change their logo, and it lasted 6 days. Be prepared to fail, right? We want to have a new idea. We think rebranding is going to make us more money. Let's try it. Ooh, the feedback was horrendous. People hated it, so they didn't change the logo in the stores. But they were able to test it by just delivering the logo on the internet and not actually changing all the signs in all their stores, right? So prepare to fail. Maybe they'll like it, maybe they won't. I'm dating myself here a little bit, but I had a Blockbuster membership, and I used to go to Blockbuster all the time. They were the #1 video movie rental company, at least in North America, and they don't exist anymore. Why? Because somebody ate their lunch and they didn't change quickly enough. They weren't prepared to be wrong, or they could not predict the future. That's why we work in this iterative way. Could they predict that Netflix was going to happen, that we would just sit at home and not go to the store and get our CDs? So, can you innovate without failure? You can't. You can't invent an airplane and not crash a bunch of airplanes. Right? So the Wright brothers crashed a bunch of things to figure out what looks good on paper, your design and your architecture. Does it actually work in real life? What about when the wind is this? What about that? So being open to that failure is key. How do we do that? Well, innovation time, experimentation. Do your development teams have time to try new things? Or are they under the gun to deliver on time, on budget, on scope? You better get that 20 points done by Friday. do we give them the space to do coding dojos or try new tools, right? That's that they have the right to figure out how to get the work done, and we want to make sure that they're trying new things so that they're better prepared to fail and be prepared for it. The other one is walk a mile in their shoes. So when I worked at the Gap every Christmas season, all of HQ is invited to go work in a store. Nothing will give you empathy for your customers like having to use the IT systems that you're building when you're trying to sell somebody a sweater. And they ask if it's in your size, and do you have it in another color, and what about this? So when's the last time that your developers and engineers worked alongside your customers and actually had direct conversations with them to find out what they want? So to make your organizations more resilient, meaning being able to quickly sense and respond and be able to then adapt to those things that you cannot predict, I think agility is your way to get there, to become resilient. All right, open to questions. Anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much. And we have a few more minutes for questions. No, so this is the first time I can ask the question on this one. So I get one question. By the way, reminder that you can ask the question by going to Slido. And I have one with metaphor. So probably I will need a help from the creator of the question. I'm going to read the question, and then
sure.
Hopefully you will get the metaphor. How do you see chances for true agility in large organization? This is the part I get is the savannah elephants that rely on size until age catch up. That is the part I don't get it. So,
how do you see the chances for true agility in large organizations, the Savannah elephant, right? Okay, that are not agile, and they rely on the size instead to catch up. Yeah.
Someone get it.
I understand what that means. So, in other words, we're an elephant, not a cheetah, right? We're a large organization, and we don't really need to be agile, right? That's the metaphor of the elephant. We don't need to be agile because we're big. And one of my customers was Orange France Telecom. If you wanted a phone, you got to go to one place, Orange France Telecom. That's it. So you have the ability. I work for government as well. If you want that government service, there's only one place to go. So do you really need to be agile? The driver for change isn't really there because no one's eating your lunch. No one's stealing your customers until they do, right? So Orange France Telecom then had competition from Free and other organizations, but at the time they didn't, right? So the driver for change definitely slows down the appetite for us humans to want to change our behavior, right? We're naturally change resistant for good reason. If it's working good enough, then let's not take a risk and change the way we're working because we don't know what the outcome's going to be. So if you're trying to introduce agility into an organization that doesn't really have a burning need to change, it's going to be harder for you because we don't really want to change as humans, right? So absolutely, but try what are the reasons why. Why do you want to change, and can you get alignment on that? So get the why agile first before you just jump in and become an agile cheerleader. I've made that mistake a few times.
Cool. At least I get the metaphor. So I thought about the elephant carpaccio.
Carpaccio, yeah.
I wasn't sure that
similar.
Was the case.
Yeah.
You can still ask the question. If not, then I will be asking the question. So how many dogs do you have?
How many dogs do I have? It depends how you count. This is my answer.
You count the legs and then you divide by 4.
So my husband says I have a halfway house for Shelties because they come in and then they go out and then they leave and who's this one and what's this one's name. So yes, but I do have a website if you want to go look at Shelties. You're welcome to go see them all.
All right. So one of the things we notice is when we change the organization, it's usually easier to be external consultant to the company.
Yes, external consultant. Yep.
Internal Scrum Master.
Yep.
And Ken Schwaber, who you mentioned already, he was saying that a dead Scrum Master is useless Scrum Master. So what is your recommendation for the Scrum Master here who want to rock the boat a little bit, and they don't know if they have a power? Like with your example with the senior manager.
Yeah, got his hands slapped.
Don't tell me what I can or can't do in this organization. I was here before you were born.
Yeah, yep, 100%. This came up in a conversation the other day, and it might have been Craig Larman that said this to me when we were working with somebody. He said, Petra, you can either change your organization or you can change your organization. So there is a point where if you're in an organization that doesn't feel like they're aligned with your values, which is you want to work in this way and they don't, maybe it's time to look for another job somewhere else. Okay, so that's sort of the end one. But the steps to that is, the other ones that you can do before you get to that step is find your people in the organization, right? Who put you in that role? Who's going to do air cover for you? Right? So that's step one. Find your people, create those practices, find the leadership. The other one is use third-party voices. Don't say, I said this. Take a Harvard Business Review paper or take a book about this and say, well, here they're saying the smart person from Harvard Business School said that the number one thing you need if you're going to do a change is a burning reason. They said it, so use third-party voices and get cover would be my idea. And then the third one is, if it's a career-limiting move, to have openness, have that conversation, but have a backup plan.
All right. Thank you very much for this one.
Thank you.